Hi, in this video we are going to talk about correlated subqueries. So far we have talked about normal subqueries. What was happening there? The subquery was executing first and then the result of the subquery was used in the outer query. And if this subquery has one more subquery inside it, then the innermost subquery is executed, then the outer and the outermost. Now, there is a special subquery which does not execute this way. When your subquery uses an attribute or column of the outer query, then it becomes a correlated subquery, and execution does not happen like it happens in the normal subqueries. Here what happens is your inner query or your subquery is evaluated for every row that we are processing in the outer query. So the execution happens this way in the correlated subqueries. Your outer queries, every row is considered one by one, and for every row, for that particular value of that row, your inner query is executed or evaluated. Let's see this example to get better understanding. We have a table, say the employee table, where we have employee name, department ID and salary, and we want to find out name and department ID of all those employees whose salary is above average in their department, right? So please remember these 2 points. Subquery uses value of the outer query, and subquery is evaluated for each row of the outer query. Now we are doing this example. How do we write query for this problem? We need to select name and department ID from employee. Let's say the table name is employee, where salary is greater than average salary of the employee in the department. So we are going to use the employee table again. So let's give it a name, the outer table as name, something like E1, where now what we do is in the inner query we are going to write something like this: select average salary of the department of this employee, right? So we'll say select. So we are processing every row one by one, and for the current row we are writing this inner query. Average salary from employee where department ID is equal to, so E1 dot department ID. So we select all the employees one by one. We now find their department's average salary by doing the E1 dot department ID, and for every employee this average is computed, and then this average is used in the outer query to process each rows. Your database management servers, they might cache the result of these queries so that they might do some optimizations basically, so that it does not evaluate the inner query for every row of the outer query. What will be the output of this query? If you see this table, there seem to be 3 departments: department ID 2, department ID 1 and department ID 3. What is the average of department ID 2? Is 30,000 plus 50,000 divided by 2, which is 40,000. And who is the employee who is having salary more than 40,000? ABC. So your one row will be ABC, department ID 2. This will not come because this is smaller than the average. Average is 40,000. Let's say next department ID. Department ID 1, what is the average? 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. So the average is 30,000, and this particular employee has more than average, so CDE 1. Now department ID 3, what is the average salary? 70,000 plus 80,000 divided by 2, which is 75,000, and this particular employee PQR has salary 80,000, which is more than average. So this will be your output of this query. Let us do one more example of correlated subqueries. We have the same employee table and we have one more table, department table, and this table has department IDs and department names. So we have 3 departments here in the employee table, but we have 5 departments here in the department table. So these 2 departments do not seem to have any employees. Now the query is, we want to find the departments that do not have any employee. So how do we write this query? We need to print the department names. So we select name. Please pause this video and try to write yourself, because now you understand correlated subqueries with the previous example. So please pause this and try to write this yourself. I'm going to write now. So we need to select the department name. Now we need to select only those department names whose department IDs do not exist in this table, right? So for that we have not exist in SQL, we have exist and not exist. Not exist returns true when the result set of subquery does not return anything. And exist is opposite. If your subquery returns anything, then your exist function, it returns true, right? So let's write down this. Select name from department where not exists. We'll use not exists. And what do we use? We use the department ID of this department, and we see if department ID exists in the employee table, right? So we use the result of outer table. Let me give it a name, short name, so that I do not have to write this department again. So I'll say select. I can select anything from this table because I just want to check whether this exists or not. So I'll say department ID from employee. Let's give it a name also, employee, where e.department ID is equal to d.department ID. So this is a subquery. What we have done here is, our outer table is department, outer queries on the department, goes through all the departments. For every department, it finds out the department IDs present in the employee table. It uses the not exist function, so it will consider only those department names which have no ID in the employee table. Let us now do one more example of correlated subqueries. The idea is this, you can use correlated subqueries in the select clause, you can use them in the update, delete, and many other places. Here I am going to do an example where I'll use subquery in the select clause. Let's see this question. The question says we need to print employee names, their salaries, and their department average salaries. So the output should be name, salary, and the average salary of this employee's department. Similarly, name, salary, and average salary of this employee's department. So the output is going to have 7 rows because we have 7 employees, and for every employee we'll print his or her salary, and after that we'll print the employee's department's average salary. So what do? We need to write select name, salary of every employee. Now we need to print average salary of this employee's department. So we'll use subquery in the select. What do we write? We say select average salary from the same employee table. Let me give it a name E2 here, where E2 dot department ID is going to be e1.department ID. So I'll give the outer table name as e1. And the outer query table is going to be from employee again. And we'll give it a name e1. So this is correlated subquery example, where we are using correlated subquery in select clause. Let's give it a name also. Let's give it a name as average. So now we are printing 3 columns: name, salary, and average salary, which is a department average of this employee. And this particular inner query is going to run for every row of E1. So what will be the output of this query? You will have 3 rows. First row will be name. You'll have 3 columns. First column will be name, second is going to be department ID, and third one is going to be average, the name that we've given. And we'll have all 7 rows in this. We'll have the first row ABC, salary of ABC, and average of ABC's department, 40,000. Right, then we'll have BCD, salary of BCD, and average of BCD's department, and then remaining 5 rows. So that's what we get after running this query. We have used this as a subquery in this whole query. So in this video, we talked about correlated subqueries. We discussed different examples. Correlated subqueries are different from normal subqueries. What happens in normal subqueries? Your subqueries run first or inner queries run first. But in case of correlated subqueries, your subquery runs for every row of the outer query.